she agreed to remarry her billionaire CEO ex-husband until she found his secret diary and learned his doctor only gave him 6 months to live. Judith's hands trembled as she held the leather journal, her voice breaking through tears. "You read my journal," Robert said, staring at the book like it was a weapon. "When were you planning to tell me, Robert?" Judith's voice shook with fury and heartbreak. "Before the wedding? After? Or were you just going to let me figure it out when you started getting too sick to hide it anymore?" Robert sank into his desk chair, suddenly looking every one of his 69 years. "I was going to tell you." "When?" "I don't know. Soon. Eventually. I kept trying to find the right moment, the right words." "The right words are undying, Judith. I proposed to you because I'm dying. That's the truth, isn't it? This whole romantic second chance is just you trying to not die alone. Have you ever discovered a truth so devastating it made you question everything you thought you knew about someone you loved? Have you faced the impossible choice between protecting your heart and honoring a lifetime of history? Before we dive into how Judith got to this moment of absolute heartbreak, do me a favor. If you've ever struggled with trust after betrayal, or wondered if it's ever too late for real honesty in a relationship, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. And hit that subscribe button, because this story will take you on an emotional journey about love, loss, and the courage to choose truth even when it costs everything. The morning had started so differently. The leather journal was tucked behind Robert's collection of first edition Hemingways, a place Judith would never have looked if she hadn't been measuring the built-in shelves for the wedding planner. At 67, she was learning that second chances came with their own particular kind of awkwardness. Like deciding whether her books belonged on her ex-husband's shelves, or if that presumed too much, even though they were remarrying in 4 weeks. 4 weeks. 28 days until she became Mrs. Robert Blake again, a title she'd carried for 28 years before their divorce a decade ago. The wedding planner, an enthusiastic woman named Caroline who couldn't have been more than 30, had been thrilled about the romantic angle. A couple reuniting after 10 years apart, finding their way back to each other in their golden years. It made for beautiful marketing material, Caroline had said with stars in her eyes. But standing in Robert's study, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan and its carefully curated collection of literary classics, Judith felt anything but starry-eyed. She felt practical. Cautious. Like a woman who'd been burned once and was carefully testing the temperature of the fire before stepping close again. The journal slipped from between the sun also rises in a farewell to arms, landing open on the Persian rug with a soft thud that seemed too loud in the quiet apartment. Judith bent to retrieve it, her reading glasses sliding down her nose as her eyes caught the date on the exposed page. April 18th. 3 months ago. Her eyes moved to the next line almost against her will, pulled by the gravity of handwritten confession. Dr. Morrison confirmed it today. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. 6 months, maybe less. He used words like palliative care and getting affairs in order, as if I'm a filing cabinet that needs organizing before someone puts me in storage. Judith's breath caught in her throat. The journal trembled in her hands, or maybe her hands were trembling. She couldn't tell anymore. The words swam before her eyes, refusing to make sense even as her brain processed each one with crystal clarity. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. 6 months. Her knees suddenly felt unreliable. She gripped the edge of the bookshelf, lowering herself into Robert's leather reading chair before her legs could give out entirely. The journal stayed open in her lap, the pages practically screaming their secrets now that one had been revealed. She kept reading, unable to stop even as tears began to blur the careful handwriting. I thought about telling the kids, but Jessica is already 4 months pregnant after 3 years of trying, and David just made partner at the firm. How do I drop this bomb on them now? How do I tell them their father is dying? Jessica. Their daughter, 8 months pregnant now with the first grandchild. Glowing despite the August heat, her hand constantly resting on her enormous belly like she was protecting something precious. Which she was. The baby was due in just a few weeks. David. Their son, 34 years old and finally making partner at one of Manhattan's most prestigious law firms just 2 months ago. He'd called Robert first when he got the news, his voice thick with pride and gratitude. "Thanks for believing in me, Dad." Robert had smiled for days after that call. The room tilted slightly. Judith forced herself to breathe, to think, to process what she was reading. Robert. Her Robert. No, her ex-husband Robert, except they were supposed to become unexed in 4 weeks. Was dying. Had been dying for 3 months. While he'd courted her again with flowers every Tuesday, her favorite pale pink roses. While he'd told those terrible jokes she'd always pretended not to find funny, the puns that made her groan and laugh simultaneously. While he proposed for the second time in their lives, this time without the arrogance of youth, just quiet hope in his 69-year-old eyes. Her fingers turned the page, needing to know more, dreading what she'd find. "I called Judith today. Asked if we could have coffee." She sounded suspicious, which is fair. "We've been divorced for 10 years, and our conversations have been limited to polite exchanges at the kids' birthdays and holidays. But God, I've missed her voice." Judith remembered that phone call with painful clarity. 2 months ago, completely unexpected. She'd been in her garden, pruning the roses that grew along her townhouse fence, when her phone rang with Robert's name on the screen. They hadn't spoken privately in months. Their last conversation had been at Easter dinner at Jessica's house, discussing the weather and real estate prices with the careful politeness of strangers. She'd almost declined the call. Her finger had hovered over the red button, 10 years of protective instincts screaming at her to maintain the distance that had finally stopped hurting. But something in the way his name looked on her screen, or maybe just curiosity, made her answer. "Judith," he'd said, and even through the phone she could hear something different in his voice. Something softer than the brisk CEO tone she remembered from their marriage. "I know this is unexpected, but I wondered if you might have time for coffee this week." She'd been silent for a long moment, her pruning shears forgotten in her hand. "Why?" The question had come out more suspicious than she'd intended, but Robert had only laughed quietly. "Fair question. I'd like to see you. Talk to you. If you're willing." And God help her, she'd been willing. She'd said yes, agreeing to meet him at a small cafe near the park, neutral territory where neither of them had the home advantage. She told herself it was just coffee, just a conversation, nothing more. Now, reading his journal entry about that phone call, Judith felt the weight of everything she hadn't known. Everything he'd been carrying alone. May 2nd. "We had coffee today. She's still beautiful, more beautiful actually. She's let her hair go silver, and it suits her in a way that makes me realize she's been hiding herself for years. We talked about the kids, about her garden, about the book club she's running at the library. She didn't ask about the company, which is everyone else's first question. She asked if I was happy." Judith's hand went unconsciously to her silver hair, which she'd stopped coloring 2 years after the divorce. During their marriage, she'd dyed it religiously every 6 weeks, maintaining the auburn brown of her youth because Robert's mother had once commented that gray hair made women look old and tired. After the divorce, she'd looked at herself in the mirror one morning and thought, "I'm 65 years old. I've earned every one of these gray hairs. Let them show." She'd expected to hate it, but instead she'd felt liberated. Like she was finally becoming visible to herself after years of performing a version of Judith that other people found acceptable. "I lied and said yes," the journal entry continued. "Then she looked at me with those brown eyes that have known me since we were 25, and she said, 'Robert, you never could lie to me convincingly.' So I told her the truth. I'm lonely. I've been lonely for 15 years, including the last 5 of our marriage. And the loneliness is worse than anything I could have imagined. 15 years. Judith did the math quickly. That would have put the beginning of Robert's loneliness right around the time he'd taken over as CEO from his father. Right when the company had demanded everything from him, all his time and energy and focus. Right when she'd started eating dinner alone more nights than not, reading in bed while he worked in his study until 2 in the morning. She'd been lonely too, she realized. They'd been lonely together, two people living parallel lives in the same house, until even the house had felt too small for their silence. I didn't tell her that I'm dying. How do you say that over coffee? But sitting across from her, watching her stir honey into her tea the way she's done for 40 years, I realized something. I don't want to die lonely. I don't want my last months to be about board meetings and merger negotiations. I want them to be about her. 40 years. They'd met 44 years ago, when Judith was 23 and finishing her teaching degree, and Robert was 25 and just starting at his father's company. She'd been waitressing at a restaurant near Columbia to pay for her final semester, and he'd come in every Thursday night, always ordering the same thing, always leaving exactly 20% tip calculated to the penny. The fourth Thursday, he'd asked her name. The eighth Thursday, he'd asked if she'd like to have dinner somewhere she didn't have to serve the food. By the 12th Thursday, she was completely in love with him. She'd stirred honey into her tea on their first real date, self-conscious about her sweet tooth, and he'd smiled and said he liked that she knew what she wanted without apologizing for it. She'd been stirring honey into her tea ever since. Judith wiped her eyes, surprised to find them wet. The journal blurred for a moment before she could focus again. May 15th. I proposed today. Not like the first time, drunk on youth and certainty, with a ring I couldn't afford and promises I didn't understand the weight of. This time I was sober in every sense. I told her I'd spent 10 years realizing that my biggest success was loving her, and my biggest failure was forgetting that success required daily attention, not just the assumption that it would maintain itself. She'd cried at that proposal. They'd been in his apartment, the penthouse he'd bought after the divorce, all glass and steel and expensive emptiness. He'd made dinner himself, burning the chicken slightly but getting the roasted vegetables perfect. Over dessert, a chocolate cake from the bakery where they'd bought their wedding cake 42 years ago, he'd taken her hand. Judith, he'd said, and his voice had cracked slightly. I've been thinking about success a lot lately. About what it means and what it costs. And I realized that I spent our entire marriage chasing the wrong definition. She'd waited, her heart pounding, not daring to hope. My biggest success was loving you, he'd continued. And my biggest failure was forgetting that success required daily attention. I treated our marriage like it would maintain itself while I focused on the company, and I lost you. I lost us. And I've spent 10 years regretting that more than anything else in my life. Then he'd pulled out a ring box, and Judith's breath had caught. She cried, the journal entry continued in Robert's handwriting. Then she said something that broke my heart. Robert, I'm 67 years old. I've built a life that doesn't hurt anymore. Why would I risk that? That had been her exact words. Judith closed her eyes, remembering the fear that had gripped her in that moment. Because she had built a life that didn't hurt. A small townhouse with a garden she tended herself. A book club at the library where she was just Judith, not Mrs. Robert Blake or the ex-wife of the CEO or anyone other than a woman who loved stories. Friends who knew nothing about her past except what she chose to share. It had taken her years to build that life, to create something that felt like hers alone. And Robert was asking her to risk it all over again. I almost told her then, the journal entry continued. Almost said, because I'm dying, and I want to spend my last month showing you the man I should have been. But that would make her decision about pity, about mercy. If Judith says yes, I need it to be because she wants me, not because she feels sorry for me. Judith's hands clenched on the journal, crumpling the pages slightly. He'd almost told her. Almost been honest from the beginning. But he'd chosen to lie instead, to withhold the most important truth of all. Except he had said something that made her say yes. She remembered it clearly. I'm not asking you to go back to what we were, he'd said quietly. I'm asking if you'd be willing to build something new. Something better. I'm asking for a chance to be present this time, to choose you every day, to show up in all the ways I failed to do before. I know I don't deserve it. But I'm asking anyway. And damn her heart, she'd said yes. Not right away. She'd made him wait 3 days while she thought about it, while she weighed the risk against the possibility of something beautiful. She'd called Jessica and David, gotten their cautious blessings. She'd sat in her garden and asked herself if she was brave enough to try again. In the end, she'd called him back and said, "Okay. Let's try. But Robert, if you hurt me again." "I won't," he'd promised. "I swear to you, Judith, I won't." But he had hurt her. He was hurting her right now, with every word in this journal, with every lie of omission from the past 2 months. The sound of the front door opening made Judith jump. She heard Robert's voice from the foyer, calling out to her. "Judith? Are you here? I forgot my phone." Her heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at the journal in her hands, then at the bookshelf where it had been hidden. Her mind raced, trying to decide what to do. Confront him now? Pretend she hadn't found it? Run? 42 years of knowing this man told her that rage would only make him retreat. Robert had always fought his battles alone, even the ones he should have shared. If she came at him with fury, he'd shut down, put up walls, give her carefully crafted explanations that revealed nothing. She quickly closed the journal and shoved it back onto the shelf, wedging it between the Hemingways with shaking hands. She stood up just as Robert appeared in the doorway of his study. At 69, he was still handsome in that distinguished way that men with good bones and expensive haircuts achieved. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit tailored to hide the weight loss she could now see clearly. But it was his eyes that caught her. Gray-blue and warm when he looked at her, with a softness that hadn't been there during their marriage. Or maybe it had been there all along, and she'd been too hurt to see it. "There you are," he said, smiling in that gentle way that had reappeared in the past 2 months. So different from the distracted pecks on the cheek that had characterized their last years of marriage. "I was thinking we could walk to the restaurant. It's a beautiful day, in." He stopped, his smile fading as he studied her face. "You've been crying. What's wrong?" Judith stood frozen for a moment, trapped between the truth she now knew and the lies she was about to tell. Her mascara was probably smeared. Her eyes were certainly red. There was no hiding that she'd been crying. "Nothing's wrong," she heard herself say, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. "Just feeling sentimental about the wedding, I suppose. Getting cold feet about whether we're too old to be this foolish." Something flickered across Robert's face. Relief, maybe. Guilt, certainly. Love, tangled up with too many other emotions to name. He crossed the room to take her hands, and Judith had to fight the urge to pull away. His fingers were thinner than she remembered. The skin papery in a way that spoke of rapid weight loss. How had she not noticed before? How had she let herself believe his explanations about finally getting serious about fitness, about eating better, about taking care of himself? "We're not too old," he said quietly, squeezing her hands gently. "If anything, we're finally old enough to know what matters." "And what matters, Robert?" The question came out sharper than she intended, edged with the anger she was trying to suppress. He studied her face for a long moment, and Judith had the unsettling feeling that he knew. That he could see the knowledge of his secret in her eyes, could read the betrayal in the set of her shoulders. But instead of confessing, he lifted her hand to his lips in that old-fashioned gesture he'd started doing again in recent weeks. "You matter," he said simply. "The kids matter. The time we have left matters. The time we have left." The phrase hung between them, heavy with double meaning. Did he realize what he'd just said? Was it deliberate, this constant reference to limited time? Or was it unconscious, the truth leaking out around the edges of his careful lies? Judith pulled her hand back gently, needing space, needing air. "Our lunch reservation is in 2 hours, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I should get home and change." "You can change here," Robert offered, gesturing toward the master bedroom. "You have things in the closet." She did have things in his closet. A drawer of her own in his dresser. A toothbrush in his bathroom. the slow accumulation of belonging that came with planning to merge lives again. But right now, Judith couldn't bear the intimacy of changing clothes in his space, of pretending everything was normal when her entire world had just shifted on its axis. "I'd rather go home," she said firmly. "I'll meet you at the restaurant." Robert looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression must have warned him off. "Okay," he said slowly. "I'll see you there at 1. Judith nodded and moved past him toward the door, desperate to escape before she shattered completely. She made it to the elevator, made it down 30 floors, made it out onto the Manhattan sidewalk where the August sun was too bright and the noise of traffic too loud. She made it 3 blocks toward the subway, her mind spinning with everything she'd read, before she had to stop. She leaned against a building, struggling to breathe, trying to process the impossible weight of what she now knew. Her phone buzzed in her purse. Probably Robert, checking on her, making sure she was okay. She couldn't talk to him. Not yet. Not until she figured out what to do with this terrible knowledge. The restaurant where Robert had suggested they meet was the same place where they'd had their first date in 1979. Judith had been 23 years old, nervous and excited, wearing a dress she'd saved for 2 months to buy. Robert had been 25, trying so hard to seem sophisticated and worldly, though she could see the nerves in the way he kept adjusting his tie. She'd ordered chicken piccata and fallen a little bit in love with him when he admitted he'd never tried capers before either, that he'd just read about this restaurant in the paper and wanted to impress her. Now, 44 years later, Judith sat in the same restaurant, in almost the same booth, and tried to reconcile the young man she'd fallen in love with and the dying man who'd lied to her for months. Robert arrived exactly on time, impeccably dressed despite the heat, his smile warm but cautious. She'd changed into a simple blue dress at her townhouse, fixed her makeup, practiced her neutral expression in the mirror. She could do this. She could sit through lunch and pretend she didn't know. She could buy herself time to think. "Do you remember what you ordered?" Robert asked, studying the menu even though Judith suspected he'd already decided. He'd always been a creature of habit. "Chicken piccata," she said. "I'd never had capers before. I thought they were the most exotic thing I'd ever tasted." "You told me they tasted like sophisticated olives," Robert said, his eyes warm with the memory. "And I fell a little bit in love with you right then because you weren't trying to pretend you'd been to places like this before." Judith's throat tightened. This was what she'd fallen in love with 2 months ago, this version of Robert who remembered the small details, who made space for nostalgia, who looked at her like she was still the most interesting person in any room. But it was all built on lies. "We were so young," she said quietly. "We were babies," Robert agreed. "Playing at being adults. I thought having a junior position at my father's company made me someone important. You were still finishing your teaching degree. And you were so proud when I got my first classroom," Judith said, the memory surfacing despite her anger. "You brought flowers to my tiny apartment and told everyone at the company that your girlfriend was shaping young minds." "Then my wife was shaping young minds," Robert corrected gently. "Best decision I ever made, marrying you." "Really?" The word came out harder than Judith intended, all her carefully practiced neutrality crumbling. "Because I remember a lot of years where it seemed like marrying the company was your actual priority." Robert's face fell, the warm nostalgia evaporating like steam. "You're right," he said quietly. "I lost perspective. I let my father's voice in my head, telling me that Blake men were defined by their business success, that providing financially was the same as providing emotionally." He reached across the table for her hand, and Judith let him take it, feeling the papery thinness of his skin, the slight tremor she'd attributed to stress. "I'm not making excuses, Judith," he continued. "I failed you. I failed us. I became exactly what my father was, and I lost the best thing in my life because of it." "And now?" Judith asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why now, Robert? After 10 years of polite distance, why suddenly decide you want me back?" She watched his face carefully, looking for the tell she'd learned to recognize over decades of marriage. The slight tightening around his eyes when he was deciding how much truth to share. Because I woke up one morning and realized I'd spent 10 years being successful and lonely, he said carefully, each word chosen with precision. Because our daughter is about to have a baby, and I started imagining what I'd tell that grandchild about what matters in life. Because I'm 69 years old, and I don't want to waste whatever time I have left. Whatever time I have left. There it was again, the phrase that kept appearing like a ghost at their table. How much time do you think you have left? Judith asked, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Robert went very still. What? You keep saying things like that. Whatever time we have left. Making the most of our remaining years. How much time do you think that is, Robert? For a moment, she thought he might actually tell her. His mouth opened, and she could see him wrestling with something enormous, something that wanted to burst out but was being held back by sheer force of will. Then the waiter appeared with their drinks, shattering the moment like dropped crystal. I just mean that we're not kids anymore, Robert said after the waiter left, his voice carefully neutral. We're both in our late 60s. We're lucky if we have 20 good years left. I don't want to waste them. The lie sat between them like spoiled food. Judith took a long sip of her wine, the taste turning bitter on her tongue. She could call him out right now. Tell him she knew. Demand the truth. But she needed time. Time to think, to feel, to decide what she wanted to do with this knowledge. Tell me about the company, she said instead, changing tactics. You never talk about work anymore. Robert's expression shifted, becoming guarded in a way that confirmed her suspicion that he was hiding something. I thought you'd appreciate that. You always said I talked about work too much. I did, Judith agreed. But now you don't talk about it at all. What's happening with Blake Industries? I've been delegating more, Robert said carefully. Training David to eventually take over. It's time. David's a lawyer, not a CEO. He has a good business mind, Robert said, and his voice carried a finality that suggested the subject was closed. And he understands what I'm trying to build. But Judith wasn't ready to let it go. Pieces were clicking together in her mind, creating a picture she didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. You're retiring, she said flatly. Semi-retiring, Robert corrected. Transitioning. I'm 69, Judith. It's reasonable to step back. It's also reasonable to tell your fiancée the truth about why you suddenly want to remarry her after 10 years of divorce, Judith said quietly. Robert's face went pale. I have told you the truth. I love you. I've always loved you, even when I was too stupid to show it properly. I want a second chance to be the husband you deserved the first time. And that's all? What else would there be? Judith looked at this man she'd loved for most of her adult life. The man who had given her 2 beautiful children and 28 years of marriage that ranged from blissful to barely tolerable. She looked at his thinning face and careful words and the way his hand trembled slightly as he lifted his water glass. I don't know, Robert, she said softly. You tell me. They walked home in silence, the earlier suggestion of a leisurely stroll abandoned for the efficiency of a shared taxi. Robert's phone buzzed constantly in his pocket, but he ignored it. Another recent change that should have told Judith something was different. The old Robert would have answered every call, disappeared for urgent meetings, prioritized business over everything else. The dying Robert had finally learned what mattered. The thought made Judith feel sick. Back at the penthouse, Robert immediately loosened his tie and headed for his study. I have some paperwork to review before the lawyer arrives tomorrow, he said. Judith's head snapped up. What lawyer? Just updating my will. Standard stuff. Standard stuff, Judith repeated, her voice sharp. Like updating your will right before you remarry your ex-wife. Robert turned, his expression carefully neutral in a way that made Judith want to scream. It's responsible estate planning, Judith. I want to make sure you and the kids are protected. Protected from what? From uncertainty. From complications. From... He stopped abruptly, seeming to realize he was saying too much. Revealing too much. Judith walked past him into the study, moving with a deliberation that felt like inevitability. She went directly to the bookshelf, reached between The Sun Also Rises and A Farewell to Arms, and pulled out the leather journal. "From this?" she asked, holding it up. The color drained from Robert's face. He stared at the leather-bound book like it was a weapon pointed at his chest. "You read my journal," he said, "and it wasn't a question." "I found it by accident," Judith said, her voice shaking despite her attempt at control. "But yes, I read it." "When were you planning to tell me, Robert? Before the wedding? After? Or were you just going to let me figure it out when you started getting too sick to hide it anymore?" Robert sank into his desk chair, and in that moment, he suddenly looked every one of his 69 years plus a few more. The vital, distinguished CEO vanished, replaced by a tired old man carrying a secret too heavy to hold alone anymore. "I was going to tell you," he said quietly. "When? I don't know." His voice cracked. "Soon. Eventually. I kept trying to find the right moment, the right words. The right words are I'm dying, Judith. I proposed to you because I'm dying." Tears streamed down her face now, hot and angry and heartbroken all at once. "That's the truth, isn't it? This whole romantic second chance is just you trying to not die alone." "No." Robert stood, his own eyes wet. "No, Judith, that's not, it's more complicated than that." "Then explain it to me." Her voice rose, 42 years of love and anger and confusion pouring out all at once. "Explain why you thought lying to me was acceptable. Explain why you proposed marriage without mentioning that you're terminally ill. Explain what possible justification. Because I didn't want you to say yes out of pity." Robert's shout filled the study, silencing them both. In the heavy quiet that followed, Judith could hear her own ragged breathing, the distant sound of traffic far below, the tick of the antique clock Robert's father had given them as a wedding present 42 years ago. "I didn't want you to marry me because I'm dying," Robert said more quietly, his voice raw. "I wanted you to marry me because you remembered why you loved me in the first place. Because these past 2 months meant something to you, not because you felt sorry for me. So you lied." "I omitted." "You lied, Robert." Judith's voice was steel-wrapped in heartbreak. "Omission is just a coward's lie. And you know what the worst part is? I said yes. I said yes because I'd started to believe that maybe we could have a second chance. That maybe you'd finally become the man who understood that love requires presence, not just provision. But it was all performance, wasn't it? You playing the reformed husband because you have a deadline. That's not fair." "Fair?" Judith laughed bitterly. "You're dying, you didn't tell me, and you're lecturing me about fairness?" Robert moved toward her, but Judith stepped back. The hurt that flashed across his face almost made her relent, but she held firm. She needed space. She needed air. She needed to not be in this room with this man and his terrible secret anymore. "I need to think," she said. I can't be here right now." "Judith, please." "How long?" She interrupted, her voice sharp. "How long did the doctor give you?" Robert's shoulders sagged like a puppet with cut strings. 6 months. 3 months ago. So you have 3 months left. Approximately, Robert said, and the clinical way he said it made something crack inside Judith's chest. Maybe a little more, maybe less. Pancreatic cancer doesn't follow a precise schedule. And you were just going to marry me and then what? Hope I didn't notice you dying? I was going to tell you after the wedding, Robert said quietly. I wanted to give you a few weeks of happiness first. Of us being married again, being happy, before the medical appointments and the decline and everything that comes with dying. That's not your decision to make. Judith's voice broke. You don't get to decide what I can handle or when I should know the truth. That's not love, Robert. That's control masquerading as protection. You're right. Robert's admission was so quiet she almost missed it. You're absolutely right, he continued. I've been selfish and cowardly and I've hurt you again, just like I did during our marriage. I'm sorry, Judith. I'm so goddamn sorry. They stood in his study, 5 feet and 42 years between them. Two people who'd promised forever twice and broken it once and were now discovering that forever sometimes had a specific expiration date. I'm going home, Judith said finally. To my house. I need space to think. Will you? Robert's voice caught. Will you come back? Judith looked at him. Really looked at him. The man who'd been her first love, her husband, her partner in raising 2 children, her biggest disappointment, and now her dying almost husband. She didn't know what she felt beyond the crushing weight of too many emotions at once. I don't know, she said honestly. I'll call you. She made it all the way to the elevator before the sobs started. Made it down 30 floors and out onto the Manhattan sidewalk where the afternoon sun felt too bright and the noise of traffic too loud. Made it 3 blocks toward the subway before she realized she was walking in the wrong direction, away from her townhouse, away from everything familiar. If you're feeling the weight of Judith's heartbreak right now, you're not alone. This story touches something deep in all of us, the struggle between protecting ourselves and risking everything for love. Take a moment to like this video if Judith's pain resonates with you, and drop a comment telling me, would you have confronted Robert immediately, or would you have needed time to process like Judith does next? Your perspective matters, and I read every single comment. Judith's townhouse smelled like lavender and old books when she finally made it home an hour later. The scent of the life she'd built after the divorce, so different from Robert's penthouse with its marble floors and million-dollar views. Walking into her cozy, cluttered home felt like exhaling after holding her breath underwater for too long. Her daughter Jessica was sitting on the front steps. Mom? Jessica struggled to her feet, 8 months pregnant and moving with the careful deliberation of someone who'd recently discovered her center of gravity had shifted dramatically. I was about to use my emergency key. Are you okay? You look terrible. I'm fine, Judith lied automatically, then stopped herself. No. Actually, I'm not fine at all. Jessica's face shifted from concern to alarm. What happened? Is it Robert? Did he, oh God, did he do something awful? Because if he hurt you again, I swear. Your father is dying, Judith said bluntly, too emotionally exhausted for gentle phrasing. Jessica's mouth opened and closed. What? Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. He has about 3 months left, maybe less. Judith unlocked her door, Jessica following her inside in stunned silence. He was diagnosed 3 months ago. That's not, Jessica's voice failed her. He would have told us. He would have said something. But even as Jessica protested, Judith could see her daughter's mind working. Remembering recent conversations, her father's weight loss, the sudden urgency about family dinners, the way he'd held her hand a little too tightly at their last lunch together. The way he'd teared up when she told him the baby was a girl. He didn't tell anyone, Judith said, moving automatically to her kitchen. Filling the kettle, pulling out teacups, going through the ritual of comfort even when nothing felt comforting. I found his journal. A journal? Jessica sank into a kitchen chair, one hand on her enormous belly. Dad keeps a journal? Apparently. Judith's hands shook as she measured out tea leaves. And in it, he wrote about being diagnosed 3 months ago. About proposing to me because he didn't want to die alone. About lying to all of us because he didn't want to ruin your pregnancy or David's partnership celebration. Jessica's hand pressed harder against her belly, tears spilling down her cheeks. He's really dying. Yes. And you found out from a journal? Yes. That absolute idiot. Jessica's voice rose. That stubborn, controlling, idiotic man. How dare he make this decision for all of us? How dare he hide something this huge because he thinks he knows what's best for everyone? Judith poured hot water over the tea bags, the familiar motion grounding her when everything else felt unmoored. He learned it from his father. Your grandfather was the same way. Carrying everything alone because Blake men don't burden their families with problems. That's toxic masculinity garbage, Jessica said fiercely, wiping her eyes. And I can't believe Dad is pulling this in 2024. Despite everything, Judith felt a small smile tug at her lips. Tell me how you really feel, sweetheart. Jessica's expression crumpled. I'm furious. And heartbroken. And terrified because my dad is dying and I'm about to have a baby and he won't. Her voice broke. He won't get to see her grow up. He'll barely get to know her. Judith moved around the table to hold her daughter, both of them crying now. Outside, the world continued as if it hadn't just tilted sideways. Cars passed, neighbors walked dogs, someone laughed on a nearby stoop. Life persisted in its relentless forward motion even as there's fragmented into before and after. What are you going to do? Jessica asked finally, pulling back to look at her mother. About the wedding? I don't know. Do you still love him? Judith closed her eyes. I never stopped loving him. Even during the worst parts of our marriage, even during the divorce, even during 10 years of polite distance, I never stopped. I just stopped liking him very much. Or trusting him to choose me over everything else. And now? Now he's dying, and he still chose everything else over being honest with me. So I don't know what that means. Jessica pulled back to study her mother's face. But these past 2 months, were they real? Did it feel like he'd changed? Judith thought about the Robert who'd shown up with flowers and bad jokes. Who'd asked about her book club and remembered her favorite wine. Who'd held her hand during movies and kissed her forehead and looked at her like she was still the most interesting person in any room. It felt real, she admitted. But I don't know if he changed or if he was just playing the part of the husband he thought I wanted because he was dying. There's one way to find out. How? Jessica squeezed her mother's hand. Ask him. Judith didn't call that night. Or the next day. She needed time to think, to feel, to process the revelation that had turned her carefully planned future into chaos. She ignored Robert's texts, his calls, his increasingly desperate voicemails. Her son David came over the evening after she told Jessica. He arrived with his lawyer's mind already working, jumping immediately to practical questions about treatment options and second opinions and why their father wasn't fighting this. He is fighting it. Judith found herself defending Robert despite her anger. Just not the way you think. He's choosing quality over quantity. By tricking you into marrying him? David's voice was sharp in that way he got when he was building a case. That's not fighting, Mom. That's manipulating. It's more complicated than that. Is it? David leaned forward, his expression intense and controlled, every inch the successful attorney. Because from where I'm sitting, Dad decided what everyone else needed to know and when they needed to know it. He's making unilateral decisions about his own death like it's a business merger that only requires his signature. Judith couldn't argue because David was right. And yet, he's scared, she said quietly. He's dying, and he's terrified, and he's handling it the only way he knows how. By trying to control everything around him so he doesn't have to feel out of control himself. That doesn't make it okay. No, Judith agreed. But it makes it human. David sat back, running his hands through his hair in a gesture so like his father it made Judith's chest ache. Are you still going to marry him? I don't know. Would you want to if he weren't dying? It was the question Judith had been asking herself for 48 hours. I thought I did. These past 2 months, I remembered why I fell in love with him in the first place. I started believing that maybe we could have what we never managed to build the first time. A real partnership where we both showed up fully. And now? Now I don't know if any of it was real or if I was just dating a dying man's idealized version of himself. Her children stayed for dinner, both of them working through their own grief and anger about their father's deception. After they left, Judith sat in her quiet house and finally let herself feel the full weight of what she'd lost. Not just the second chance at marriage, but the future she'd started imagining. Growing old with Robert, but actually old. Traveling to all the places they'd always talked about but never visited. Spoiling grandchildren together. Having lazy Sunday mornings with crossword puzzles and coffee and no urgency except enjoying each other's company. All of it had been built on a foundation that was already crumbling. The doorbell rang at 9:30. Judith knew who it was before she opened the door. Robert stood on her porch looking haggard. A shadow of the confident man who'd proposed 2 months ago. His hair was disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. His shirt was wrinkled. His eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. "I know you said you needed space, and I'm sorry for showing up uninvited," he said without preamble. "But I couldn't, I'm not good at waiting, and I'm running out of time to fix this." "Running out of time," Judith repeated. "Is that supposed to make me feel sympathy or urgency?" "Neither. Both." "I don't know." Robert's composure cracked completely. "I'm terrified, Judith. I'm dying, and I'm terrified, and I've handled this all wrong because I thought I could control it. Thought I could manage my own death like a project with deliverables and timelines. But I can't, and I've hurt you in the process, and I don't know how to fix it." Judith stepped back. "Come in." They sat in her living room, the space that held no memories of their marriage. Only the life she'd built after. Robert looked around at the overflowing bookshelves and the comfortable mismatched furniture and the photographs of their children and the soon-to-arrive grandchild. "You've made a beautiful home," he said quietly. "I made a life that felt safe," Judith corrected. "After our divorce, I needed to rebuild something that was just mine. Something that couldn't be taken away by someone else's choices. And then I came back and asked you to risk it." "Yes." Robert nodded slowly. "The journal you found, did you read all of it?" "No. Just the first few entries. You should read the rest." He pulled a familiar leather-bound book from his jacket pocket. "I brought it with me. I think you need to see what I couldn't say out loud." Judith took the journal hesitantly. "Robert." "Please," he interrupted. "Just read it. Then we can talk, or you can throw me out, or whatever you need to do. But I need you to understand that while I lied about the diagnosis, everything else was real." After Robert left, Judith made tea and settled into her favorite reading chair. The journal heavy in her lap. She opened it to where she'd stopped reading days ago and continued forward. May 20th. Judith said yes. She actually said yes. I should be thrilled, but instead I'm consumed with guilt. What right do I have to ask her to marry me when I'm dying? What kind of man proposes without mentioning he has a terminal diagnosis? But I'm also selfish enough to not regret it. Because when she said yes, she smiled in a way I haven't seen in 15 years. She looked happy. And God, I've missed making her happy. Judith's hand trembled slightly as she turned the page. June 3rd. Wedding planning is both wonderful and agonizing. Judith wants a small ceremony in the garden where we got married the first time. She's excited about it in this careful way, like she's afraid to be too happy. I want to tell her she doesn't need to be careful, that I'm all in this time. But how can I say that when I'm keeping this huge secret? The neuropathy is getting worse. My hands shake more than they did last week. I told Judith it's essential tremor, which is technically true. It is a tremor, and it is essential that she not know it's from the cancer spreading. I'm becoming an expert at technically true lies. Technically true lies. Judith closed her eyes briefly. That phrase captured everything. Robert had always been brilliant with words, knowing exactly how to phrase things to reveal just enough while hiding what really mattered. June 15th. We had dinner with Jessica and Mark tonight. Jessica is 6 months along now and glowing. She asked if I'm feeling okay, said I look thin. I deflected with jokes about Judith finally getting me to eat healthier. The lie came so easily. Too easily. Watching Jessica with her hand on her pregnant belly, I did the math. If I'm lucky, I'll meet my grandchild. If I'm very lucky, I'll be coherent enough to hold her. If I'm not lucky, I can't think about that. Tears blurred the words. Judith remembered that dinner clearly. She'd noticed Jessica's concern, noticed the way Robert had changed the subject quickly. She thought he was just being private, not wanting to discuss his health with the kids. Now she understood. He'd been protecting them. Or himself. Or both. June 28th. I told Dr. Morrison I'm not doing the aggressive treatment. He tried to convince me that I might get a few more months, but at what cost? Spending my last days vomiting and exhausted and unable to enjoy anything? I'd rather have 3 good months with Judith than 6 miserable ones. He asked if I'd told my family yet. I said yes. Another lie. I'm becoming a collection of lies held together by fear. The entry was dated almost 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks of lies piled on top of lies, each one making it harder to tell the truth. July 2nd. Judith and I went to the symphony tonight. Beethoven's Ninth, which we heard on our honeymoon 42 years ago. During the 4th movement, she took my hand and leaned her head on my shoulder, and I thought, this is what I'm fighting for. Not more time in general, but more time for moments like this. If I'd told her from the beginning, would we have had this evening? Would she have been present, or would she have been mourning already? I don't know if I'm protecting her or protecting myself. Maybe both. Judith remembered that evening. The way the music had swelled and filled the concert hall. The way Robert's hand had felt in hers, warm and solid and real. The way she'd leaned against his shoulder and felt, for the first time in years, like she was exactly where she belonged. She'd been falling in love with him again. And he'd known it was all temporary. July 10th. David made partner today. He called me first, before anyone else, and I could hear the pride in his voice. Thanks for believing in me, Dad, he said. I wanted to tell him I'm dying. Wanted to say all the important things fathers should say to their sons. Instead I said, let's celebrate this weekend. Whole family dinner. I'm running out of time for the conversations that matter. But I keep postponing them, like if I don't say the words out loud, the diagnosis isn't quite real yet. July 18th. Woke up at 3 in the morning in pain. Took the medication Dr. Morrison prescribed and sat in the study, looking at photos of our life. Our wedding, the kids as babies, family vacations, graduations. 42 years of memories, and I'm about to become one. The thought that terrifies me most isn't dying. It's being forgotten. Will Jessica tell her daughter about me? Will David remember the fishing trips we took when he was little? Will Judith? I can't finish that thought. Judith pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. He was afraid of being forgotten. This man who'd built a business empire, who'd commanded boardrooms and closed billion-dollar deals, was afraid that his life would fade from memory like morning fog. July 25th. 3 weeks until the wedding. Judith asked if I was sure about this, if we weren't rushing. I said I'd never been more sure of anything. She kissed me and said, I love you, Robert. I really do love you again. Again. That word is everything. She loves me again, which means she stopped, which means I failed her badly enough that love became past tense. And now I've earned it back, except it's built on incomplete information. I should tell her. I know I should tell her. Tomorrow. I'll tell her tomorrow. July 30th. I didn't tell her tomorrow. Or the day after. I'm a coward, and time is running out, and I don't know how to fix this. The final entry was dated yesterday. August 5th. Judith found the journal. I saw it in her face the moment I came home. That particular combination of devastation and fury that only comes from discovered betrayal. She knows. And instead of relief that the secret is finally out, I just feel the crushing weight of having hurt her again. I've spent 2 months trying to be the husband I should have been 40 years ago, and I've failed in the exact same way. By deciding what she needs to know instead of trusting her with the truth. If she walks away, I'll deserve it. But God, I hope she doesn't. Not because I'm dying and don't want to die alone, though that's true. But because these past 2 months have been the happiest I've been in 15 years. Because loving Judith openly, without the distractions of work and pride and all the things I used to hide behind, has shown me what our marriage could have been if I'd been brave enough to be vulnerable. I'm out of time to be anything but brave now." Judith closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. The entries painted a picture of a man desperately trying to hold on to something beautiful while knowing he was building it on a foundation of lies. A man terrified of dying alone, but even more terrified of burdening the people he loved. A man who'd learned the right lessons too late. It was the most Robert thing she'd ever read. Brilliant and flawed and heartbreakingly human. Her phone rang. Robert's name appeared on the screen. "Did you finish reading?" he asked without preamble. "Yes." "And?" Judith took a shaky breath. "And I think we need to have a very long, very honest conversation. I can be there in 20 minutes. "No. Tomorrow. Come for breakfast. 8 o'clock. She needed one more night to think, to feel, to decide what truth she could live with. "Judith?" "Yes?" "I love you. I know I've lost the right to say it without complication, but it's true. Everything else I lied about, but never that." After they hung up, Judith sat in the darkness of her living room, holding the journal that contained her dying ex-husband's truth, trying to decide what kind of ending their story deserved. Robert arrived at 7:50 the next morning, carrying bagels and coffee and looking like he hadn't slept. Judith had been awake since 5, rehearsing speeches and discarding them, trying to organize feelings that refused to be linear. They sat at her kitchen table. The morning light soft through the curtains. For a moment, neither spoke. "I'm sorry," Robert finally said. "I know those words aren't enough, but they're where I need to start. I'm sorry for lying. For deciding what you could handle. For making the same mistakes I made during our marriage. Protecting you from truth because I was really protecting myself from vulnerability." Judith wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. "Tell me why. Not the reasons from the journal. The real why." Robert was quiet for a long moment. "Because if I told you I was dying before I proposed, anything you felt would be contaminated by pity. If you said yes, I wouldn't know if it was because you loved me or because you felt sorry for me. And I couldn't bear the thought of spending my last months in a marriage built on sympathy. So instead you built it on lies. Not lies. Omission." "Robert." Judith's voice was sharp. "We've been over this. Omission is just a coward's lie. Don't insult me by pretending there's a meaningful difference. You're right. I'm sorry." He ran his hands through his hair in that familiar gesture of frustration. "I've spent my whole life controlling narratives. Managing information, deciding what people needed to know when. It's how I built the company. It's how I functioned as a husband and father. And it's a terrible way to love someone." "Yes. It is. But Judith, I need you to understand something." Robert leaned forward, his eyes intense. "These past 2 months, every moment was real. Every conversation, every laugh, every time I reached for your hand. That was me loving you without the distractions of work and pride and all the armor I used to wear. That was me finally being the man I should have been all along. Because you were dying. Because I was finally paying attention." Robert's voice broke. "It shouldn't have taken a terminal diagnosis to wake me up, but it did. And I hate that I wasted so many years being present in body but absent in every way that mattered. I hate that our children grew up with a father who was always at the office or on a phone call or too tired to really engage. I hate that you spent 28 years married to someone who took you for granted." Judith felt tears sliding down her face. "I hate that too. I can't give you back those years. I can't undo the loneliness or the resentment or the slow death of our marriage. But I can give you the truth now, completely and without reservation. So here it is." He took a shaky breath. "I'm dying. I have maybe 3 months left, probably less. The cancer is aggressive, and I'm choosing comfort care over aggressive treatment because I'd rather have a few good months than a few more miserable ones. I propose to you because I love you and I've never stopped loving you, even when I was terrible at showing it. I want to spend whatever time I have left being the husband you deserve from the beginning. Present, attentive, choosing you over everything else. Robert paused, his eyes searching her face. But I also proposed because I'm terrified of dying alone. Because I want someone who knows me, really knows me, to hold my hand at the end. And because selfishly, I want my last memories to be of loving you and being loved by you. That's the whole truth. And if it's not enough, if you can't forgive the lies or trust me again, I'll understand. The kitchen was silent except for the tick of the clock and the distant sound of morning traffic. Judith looked at this man who'd been her whole world twice now. Who'd disappointed her profoundly and loved her deeply, often simultaneously. I can't marry you, she said quietly. Robert's face crumbled, but he nodded. I understand. I can't marry you because I can't build a marriage on a foundation of lies and terminal diagnosis and the pressure of limited time. It wouldn't be fair to either of us. I understand, Robert repeated, his voice hollow. But, Judith reached across the table to take his hand. I can love you. I can choose to spend your remaining time together, building something real. Not a marriage, but a partnership. Not recreating the past, but creating something new. Robert's head snapped up. You're not leaving? I'm furious with you. I'm heartbroken and angry and I don't trust you the way I need to trust someone I'm marrying. But I do love you. And I'm 67 years old, Robert. I've learned that love doesn't have to be perfect to be worthwhile. It just has to be honest. I can be honest, Robert said, squeezing her hand. I swear to you, Judith, no more omissions. No more deciding what you can handle. Complete transparency, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. We tell the kids, Judith said firmly. Today. Together. No more secrets. Today, Robert agreed. And we face this as partners. I come to doctor appointments. I'm involved in decisions. You don't protect me from the hard parts. I won't. And Robert? Judith's voice softened. We make the time count. However much there is, we don't waste it on recriminations or regrets. We show up for each other. Honestly. I can do that. Robert lifted her hand to his lips. Thank you for not walking away. Thank you for loving me even though I don't deserve it. You do deserve it, Judith said. We both do. We deserve an ending that's true. What about the wedding? Robert asked quietly. Caroline, the deposits, all the plans. I'll call Caroline this afternoon, Judith said. We'll cancel everything. She'll be disappointed, but the deposits don't matter. Nothing matters except being honest about what we're actually doing here. Telling Jessica and David was every bit as difficult as Judith had anticipated. They gathered at Judith's townhouse that same afternoon, all four of them sitting in her small living room while Robert explained everything. The diagnosis 3 months ago. The decision not to pursue aggressive treatment. The proposal born from love and fear and the desperate desire not to die alone. Her children cycled through shock, anger, grief, and reluctant acceptance in the span of 2 hours. David wanted second opinions. Jessica wanted alternative treatments. Both wanted their father to fight harder, live longer, not give up. But Robert, with Judith's hand firmly in his, explained his choice with a clarity she'd never heard from him before. I'm not giving up, he said, his voice steady despite the tears on his face. I'm choosing quality over quantity. I'm choosing to spend my last months with the people I love instead of in hospitals being pumped full of chemicals that might give me a few more weeks at the cost of being too sick to enjoy them. I'm choosing to be present when Jessica's baby is born instead of too sick from chemotherapy to hold her. I'm making the choice that feels right for me, and I need you both to respect that, even if you don't agree with it. But 3 months, Jessica sobbed, her hand on her enormous belly. That's not enough time. No, Robert agreed, his own voice thick with tears. It's not. But it's what we have, so let's make it count. David, always the lawyer, had practical questions. Estate planning, power of attorney, healthcare directives. Robert answered each one patiently, and Judith realized he'd already taken care of most of it. The lawyer appointment he'd mentioned wasn't to update his will. It was to add Judith as his healthcare proxy. "You were going to do that without telling me the diagnosis?" she asked quietly. Robert had the grace to look ashamed. "I was going to tell you right after. I promise." When they finally left, Jessica hugged her mother tightly. "I don't know whether to be furious at Dad or heartbroken for him." "Be both," Judith said. "That's what I'm doing." In the weeks that followed, Robert proved that truth could be learned at any age. He was transparent about symptoms, calling Judith when the pain was bad instead of hiding it. He was honest about hard days, admitting when he was too tired to leave the apartment instead of pushing through and pretending everything was fine. He was vulnerable in ways the old Robert never would have allowed. When he was scared, he said so. When he needed help, he asked. When the neuropathy in his hands made it hard to button his shirt, he let Judith help him instead of struggling alone in stubborn pride. Judith found herself falling in love with this version of Robert. Not because he was dying, but because he was finally, completely, courageously himself. They didn't recreate their old marriage. Instead, they built something new. Mornings at Judith's house with coffee and crossword puzzles, Robert arriving early and staying late. Afternoons when he felt well enough to walk in the park, moving slowly but savoring every step. Evenings surrounded by Jessica and David and their families, everyone drawing closer as time became more precious. We're at a turning point in Judith's journey, that moment where anger starts to make room for something more complicated. If this story is touching your heart, do me a favor. Share it with someone who needs to hear about the messy, complicated reality of love at any age. And stick with me, because what happens next will challenge everything you think you know about forgiveness. In early September, just over 5 months after Robert's diagnosis, Jessica went into labor. They all rushed to the hospital. Robert moving slower than the rest but refusing to be left behind. When Jessica's daughter was born at 3 in the morning on September 7th, Robert held his granddaughter with shaking hands and tears streaming down his face. "She's perfect," he whispered, staring at the tiny face with wonder. "Absolutely perfect." "Her name is Judith," Jessica announced, looking at her mother. "Judith Clare. After the strongest woman I know." The hospital room blurred as Judith held her namesake. Feeling the weight of legacy and love and the bittersweet beauty of moments that were both joyful and heartbreaking. Robert stood beside her, one arm around her shoulders, watching his daughter and granddaughter with an expression of such profound love and grief that Judith had to look away. "I wish I could see her grow up," he said quietly, "for Judith's ears only." "You'll be with her anyway," Judith replied. "In the stories we tell. In the love we give her. In everything good we can teach her about what matters." By early October, 6 months after his diagnosis, Robert had moved into Judith's townhouse. Not because they were getting married, but because navigating his penthouse had become too difficult. The stairs, the distance to everything, the sterile perfection that felt wrong when his body was falling apart. Judith's townhouse, with its cozy rooms and overstuffed bookshelves and garden visible from every window, felt like the right place to be. "I like it here," Robert said one afternoon, sitting in her kitchen while she made soup. "It feels like home in a way the penthouse never did." "That's because this is a home," Judith replied. The penthouse was a showpiece. By early November, 7 months after diagnosis, hospice had set up a hospital bed in Judith's living room. Robert's decline had been gradual through the summer and early fall, then suddenly sharp in the past few weeks. The pain was harder to manage. His energy faded quickly. But through it all, Judith showed up. She read to him when he couldn't focus on books himself, starting with his favorite Hemingway novels and moving on to poetry when those became too heavy. She played music from their younger years. Frank Sinatra and Ella Fitzgerald and all the songs they danced to in their tiny first apartment. She held his hand through pain and fear and the particular loneliness of dying. Jessica and David visited daily, often bringing baby Judith, who was now 2 months old. Robert would hold her when he had the strength, marveling at how much she'd grown, how her eyes were starting to focus, how her tiny hand would wrap around his finger. "She won't remember me," he said once, watching the baby sleep in his arms. "No," Judith agreed. "But we'll make sure she knows you. We'll tell her about her grandfather who loved deeply and made mistakes and learned, at the end, what really mattered." "Do you regret it?" Robert asked one afternoon when the hospice nurse had just left. The November light slanting through the windows in golden bars. "Not marrying me? Not having that official second chance?" Judith looked at the man in the hospital bed. A shadow of the vigorous CEO who'd proposed to her 5 months ago. But somehow more present than he'd ever been during their actual marriage. "No," she said honestly. "Because these past months of real truth and real partnership, this is the marriage we never managed to build the first time. We don't need a ceremony to make it official. We just needed to finally be honest. I love you, Judith Collins." "I love you too, Robert Blake." He died on a Tuesday morning in late November. 7.5 months after his diagnosis, slightly longer than the 6 months his doctor had predicted. Judith was holding his hand, their children on either side of the bed, and sunlight streaming through the windows of the home she'd built after their divorce. His breathing had been labored all night, but as the sun rose on November 28th, it seemed to ease. He opened his eyes one last time, looking at each of them in turn. His gaze lingered longest on Judith. "Thank you," he whispered. His last words. Judith knew he meant for everything. For loving him. For forgiving him. For staying. For letting him go. At the memorial service 3 days later, Judith stood before a room full of people who'd known Robert as the brilliant CEO, the successful businessman, the philanthropist who'd revolutionized sustainable technology. But she spoke about the man he'd been in his final months. Vulnerable, honest, fully present. "Robert taught me that it's never too late to choose truth," she said, her voice steady despite tears. "That love doesn't require perfection, just presence. That the best partnership isn't about avoiding mistakes, but about having the courage to be honest about them." He gave me 4 months of the partnership we could never quite manage in 28 years of marriage. And while I wish we had longer, I'm grateful we had enough time to get it right. Afterward, Jessica hugged her mother tightly. "You gave Dad the greatest gift at the end. You let him be human." "He gave me the same gift," Judith replied. "He finally let me see all of him, not just the parts he thought were acceptable." David approached, carrying baby Judith, who was sleeping peacefully despite the crowd. "Mom? I found this in Dad's things. It's addressed to you." The envelope was sealed, Judith's name written in Robert's careful handwriting, though shakier than it used to be. She opened it to find a letter dated the day before he died. "My dearest Judith. If you're reading this, I've run out of time to say these things in person, so I'm trusting paper to carry what my voice cannot. Thank you for the gift of these final months. Thank you for loving me despite my lies and my fears and my lifelong habit of trying to control everything. Thank you for showing me that real partnership means sharing the weight of hard things, not carrying them alone to spare each other. You asked me once if I regretted the way I lived, all those years of prioritizing work and status over presence. I regret it more than I have words to express. But I'm also learning that regret can be a teacher if we let it. My regret taught me to spend my last months differently. To show up. To be honest. To choose love over pride. I hope you'll remember these months when you think of me. Not the CEO or the distant husband or even the dying man, but the person I finally became when I stopped performing and started being real. Live fully, Judith. Love again if you find someone worthy of you. Read good books, tend your garden, spoil our grandchildren. And know that whatever comes after this life, I'll carry the memory of your love with me. It's the best thing I've ever had. Yours, always and finally honest, Robert." Judith folded the letter carefully, placing it in her purse next to the engagement ring Robert had given her. The ring she'd worn for only 2 months before everything changed. The ring that represented what might have been, but also what actually was. A love that learned truth too late, but learned it nonetheless. Around her, people shared stories of Robert's business acumen and professional achievements. But Judith held close the truth only she knew. That the great Robert Blake's finest accomplishment wasn't building a company or accumulating wealth. It was learning, in his final months, how to be loved and how to love in return. Completely, vulnerably, honestly. And that, Judith thought as she held her granddaughter and felt the ache of loss alongside the fullness of love, was a lesson worth any price. Even the price of grief. Even the price of a second chance that came too late and ended too soon. Because some love stories don't get happy endings. They just get true ones. And sometimes, that's enough. 6 months later, on a spring morning in late May that smelled of renewal and possibility, Judith tended her garden. The roses Robert had sent her every week during their reconciliation had taken root, blooming pink and white against her fence. She'd planted them the week after he died, needing to put something beautiful into the ground. To create life from the soil of loss. Grandma. Little Judith toddled across the lawn, her parents following behind. At 8 months old, she had Robert's gray eyes and Jessica's stubborn chin and a laugh that filled Judith's heart with joy and longing in equal measure. "Hello, sweet girl," Judith said, scooping up her granddaughter. "Did you come to help me garden?" "We came to see how you're doing," Jessica said, studying her mother's face with concern. "David said you seemed sad at dinner last night." "I was sad," Judith admitted. "Yesterday would have been our 43rd wedding anniversary. I was thinking about all the years we had and all the years we didn't get." "Do you wish you'd remarried him?" David asked, the question he'd been carefully not asking for months. Judith considered it, looking at the roses in the garden and the home she'd built. Thinking of the 4 months she'd had with Robert at his most honest and vulnerable. "No," she said finally. "I wish we'd been honest with each other 30 years ago. I wish we'd built the real partnership then that we only managed at the very end. But those final months, they were exactly what they needed to be. Not a fairy tale. Just true." "That's very zen of you, Mom," Jessica said, but she was smiling. "I'm 68 years old. If I haven't learned to make peace with complicated truths by now, I never will." Judith kissed baby Judith's head. "Besides, I'm too busy for prolonged sadness. I have a book club to run, a garden to tend, and a granddaughter to spoil." "Speaking of which," David said, exchanging a look with Jessica. "We've been talking, and we want to establish a foundation in Dad's name. Something focused on supporting caregivers and families dealing with terminal illness. We thought maybe you'd want to be involved." Judith felt tears prick her eyes. "I think your father would love that." "We thought we'd call it the Robert Blake Truth and Love Foundation," Jessica added. "Because at the end, that's what he finally learned, right? That love requires truth?" "Yes," Judith said softly. "That's exactly what he learned." After her children left, Judith sat in her garden with a cup of tea, watching the roses sway in the breeze. She thought about Robert's letter, about his request that she live fully and love again. She thought about the book club widower who'd been asking her to coffee for weeks now, a kind man named Thomas who'd lost his wife 2 years ago and understood the complicated landscape of grief. She thought about the future that was still unwritten, still full of possibility. She thought about truth and love and second chances and endings that weren't quite endings because the lessons remained. And she thought, I'm still here. I'm still growing. The story isn't over. Which was, perhaps, the greatest truth of all. Thank you for joining me on Judith and Robert's journey. Their story reminds us that it's never too late to choose truth, that love at any age can be messy and complicated and still worth fighting for, and that sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is letting them be fully, honestly human, flaws and all. Now I want to hear from you. What lesson from Judith's story resonated most deeply? Was it her courage to stay even after the betrayal? Her wisdom in choosing partnership over marriage? Or maybe Robert's final transformation into the man he'd always had the potential to be? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, do 3 things for me. First, hit that like button so I know these kinds of deep, emotionally honest stories are what you want more of. Second, share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late for truth, for growth, for choosing love even when it's complicated. And third, subscribe to Mr. Hawthorne Family and hit that notification bell, because I'm committed to bringing you more stories that don't just entertain, they help us understand ourselves and each other a little better. Remember, friends, some love stories don't get fairy tale endings. They get real ones. And real ones, messy and imperfect and heartbreakingly honest, are often the most beautiful of all. Until next time, I'm Mr. Hawthorne, reminding you that wherever you are in your own journey, whether you're navigating loss, contemplating second chances, or simply trying to figure out what truth and love look like at this stage of your life, you're not alone. Your story matters. And I'm honored you let me share this one with you. Take care of yourselves, and each other.